Eric Bristow, the five-time world darts champion, has died at the age of 60. His huge success in the 1980s helped the game to win a mass audience. Eric Bristow had a heart attack in Liverpool yesterday. The crowd at a tournament there last night chanted his name when his death was announced.
April 5th, 2018. Liverpool's Echo Arena was alive with the sound of darts hitting boards and crowds erupting in celebration. It was Judgment Night in the Premier League, one of the biggest events in the darting calendar. But before the night was over, the sport would lose one of its greatest icons, and a taxi driver waiting for a fare would find himself fighting desperately to save a legend's life.
Like, two together all the time. You know, with Sky, we used to be together all the time, and we do our bit of spotting, and what he's done for our game. I mean, tonight, just see that really, if it wasn't for Eric, no one would be here tonight, and it's a massive loss to our sport.
Eric Bristow, the crafty Cockney, checks out.
Eric Bristow had been at the arena that evening, not competing, but enjoying himself at a corporate event. At 60 years old, the crafty Cockney remained one of darts' most beloved figures. He'd spent the afternoon playing darts with VIPs, sharing stories, soaking in the atmosphere of a sport he'd helped build. Earlier that day, he'd even popped into a pub across from the venue where his old friend and rival Bobby George was doing a show. George remembered it clearly. Eric walked in, said hello, had a pint, then said he'd see him later. 2.5 hours later, he was gone. What nobody knew was that Eric had been feeling unwell that day. In his diary, something he rarely used, except for work commitments, he'd written a haunting entry that morning. Cold sweats. It feels like my heart is going to explode. Don't like it. Going to Echo. The show must go on. His partner, Bex Gadd, would later reveal those words, explaining that it was so typical of Eric. He lived for darts, and in the end, he died for it too. For those who didn't know Bristow's impact on darts, it's hard to overstate. Between 1980 and 1986, he won 5 world championships, dominating the sport during its transition from smoky pubs to television screens across the nation. He was darts' first genuine superstar, a player with the skill to back up his confident, sometimes cocky personality. His signature throwing style, pinky finger extended like someone holding a teacup at a refined garden party, became iconic. More than that, he discovered and mentored Phil Taylor, initially loaning him £9,000 and showing him the ropes in his own pub, also called the Crafty Cockney. Taylor would go on to win 16 world championships, becoming the greatest player of all time. Bristow wasn't just a champion, he was the foundation upon which modern professional darts was built. But Eric Bristow was also a man who lived life on the edge. Bobby George, who had known him since they were teenagers, put it bluntly, Eric didn't lead a healthy lifestyle. He was a heavy smoker, always rolling his own cigarettes. He'd think nothing of drinking 15 or 16 pints of Guinness in a day, rounding it off with a curry. George had warned him more than once, "You smoke and you drink too much." Eric's response was pure Bristow. "I know all about that, Bob, but put it this way, no one is going to be pushing me around in a wheelchair. When I go, I'll go like that." And he snapped his fingers. That Thursday evening, as the matches continued inside the Echo Arena, Eric decided to call it a night. He walked from the venue toward the nearby Pullman Hotel, where his car was parked. The cool Liverpool air, the distant sounds of the arena, it should have been an unremarkable walk. He stopped near the car park, pulled out his tobacco, and started rolling a cigarette. It was a ritual he'd performed thousands of times. Then, halfway through, he collapsed. Ricky Nicol was sitting in his taxi outside the Pullman Hotel, waiting for a fare. The 32-year-old father of 3 had been driving cabs in Liverpool for years, and like many taxi drivers, he'd learned to stay alert to his surroundings. When he saw a man crumple and fall near the car park, instinct took over. Ricky had trained in first aid and CPR years earlier, when his children were born, just in case, like any protective parent would. He never imagined he'd use those skills on a stranger on a random Thursday night, let alone on one of the most famous figures in British sport. Ricky immediately stopped what he was doing and rushed over. The man was on the ground, not breathing, clearly in serious trouble. A friend of the collapsed man was there, panicking, frozen in the moment. Ricky knew someone needed to take charge. He told the friend to call an ambulance immediately. Then, without hesitation, he dropped to his knees and started CPR. The man's chest wasn't rising. His face had lost color. Ricky pressed down rhythmically, counting compressions, trying desperately to get oxygen flowing to the brain, to keep the heart pumping, to do anything that might save this stranger's life. An off-duty nurse who happened to be passing by saw what was happening and joined in. Together, they worked over the man, their hands moving in practiced synchronization, desperate to keep him alive until the paramedics could arrive with proper equipment. It was only then, in those frantic minutes of chest compressions and rescue breaths, that the friend told Ricky who he was trying to save. Eric Bristow, 5-time world champion, darts legend, the man who had made the sport what it was today. Inside the Echo Arena, the evening's final match was underway. Peter Wright and Daryl Gurney were battling on stage, the crowd roaring with every dart thrown. Gurney had become a father just that morning, a day of pure joy now about to be overshadowed by tragedy. Then, during the match, whispers began spreading through the stands. Something had happened outside. Someone said it was Eric. The crowd started singing softly at first, then louder, voices joining together in tribute. There's only one Eric Bristow. The commentators went silent, struggling to maintain composure. News had broken. One of darts' greatest champions had suffered a heart attack. Players on stage were told mid-match. Wright, known for his flamboyant outfits and emotional nature, couldn't hold back tears. His face crumpled as the reality hit him. Gurney, dealing with the contrast of his happiest day turning into one of his saddest, was visibly shaken. The entire arena, thousands of people who had come to watch darts, stood in spontaneous tribute to a man who had given so much to the sport.
Eric Bristow, the crafty Cockney, checks out. It's farewell Britty. A lot of emotion here in Liverpool.
Outside, in the car park, paramedics had arrived, taking over from Ricky and the nurse, working with advanced equipment, doing everything medical science could do. But despite their best efforts, Eric Bristow was pronounced dead. He was 60 years old. Later, Ricky Nichols spoke to the Liverpool Echo about what happened. His words were simple, heavy with the weight of what he'd experienced, carrying the quiet pain of someone who'd given everything, and it still wasn't enough. I did the best I could, but it wasn't enough. He didn't know Eric Bristow personally. He hadn't been a massive darts fan. He didn't seek recognition or praise afterward. He was just a father, a taxi driver, doing what he could in an impossible situation. Years earlier, he'd learned CPR to protect his children to be ready if one of them ever needed him. That night, he used those same skills, trying to save a legend, a stranger, a human being who deserved every chance to live. There's something profoundly human about this story. Ricky Nichols represents every person who has ever learned first aid, hoping they'll never need it but ready to act if they do. He had no connection to darts beyond being in the right place at the wrong time. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think about whether the man on the ground was famous or unknown, rich or poor, a champion or a nobody. He just tried to help. And in that moment, on a cold Liverpool evening outside a hotel car park, he embodied the best of what humans can be for each other. Eric Bristow's death sent shockwaves through the darting world. Tributes poured in from players, commentators, and fans around the globe. Phil Taylor, who had just retired after losing in the World Championship final that January, wrote on Twitter, "Words cannot express how sad and shocked I am to hear the terrible news about Eric's passing. A huge influence on my career and a larger-than-life character. The world has lost a legend." Barry Hearn, chairman of the PDC, said Eric would never be forgotten, calling him a legend whose name would forever be synonymous with the sport. Keith Deller, who had beaten Bristow in the legendary 1983 World Championship final with a famous 138 checkout, was working as a spotter that night. When he spoke on stage after learning of Eric's death, he could barely hold it together. If it wasn't for Eric, no one would be here tonight. He's one of the best friends I've ever had in my life. For Ricky Nichols, the memory of that night likely stays with him in ways the rest of us can only imagine. Not because he failed, no one could have saved Eric Bristow that night. His heart had simply given out after years of being pushed to the limit, but because he tried. In the face of tragedy, he didn't freeze. He didn't look away. He didn't wait for someone else to step up. He acted, and in doing so, he gave Eric Bristow something precious in his final moments. The presence of someone who cared. Someone who fought for his life even when the outcome was already written. Someone who treated him not as a celebrity but as a human being worth saving. Sometimes, heroism isn't about succeeding. It's about showing up when it matters. It's about using whatever skills you have, however small they might seem, to try to make a difference. Ricky Nicol didn't save Eric Bristow's life. The years of heavy smoking, the 15 pints of Guinness, the relentless lifestyle had taken their toll, and that April evening, Eric's heart simply couldn't go on. But Ricky honored Eric's life in the most fundamental way possible, by refusing to let him die alone, by fighting for him, by caring when it mattered most. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for, someone who'll fight for us when we can't fight for ourselves. That's the story of a taxi driver and a legend, of a chance encounter that ended in tragedy, but also revealed the quiet heroism that exists in ordinary people every single day.